you as a homeowner, you can actually contact your utility services and you can ask them for your utility information. So if you contact your utility providers, you can see how much natural gas you used over the past year or 2 years. You can actually see how much electricity you would have used. And then on top of that, they'll give you some trends as well. Was it increasing? Was it decreasing? Was it steady? They'll give you some information about that as well. Now, if you see that your electricity use is increasing for whatever reason, you can then determine whatever the reason for that is. You may know the reason. Maybe you installed a new appliance, or if you see your natural gas use increasing, maybe you installed a new water heater or something of that nature. But now you have a little bit more information that you can use to go ahead. Now, another thing that we can do with this information, and I'll mention this a little bit later as we go ahead as well, you can actually analyze this information and look for trends. So you can look for year-over-year trends, see if you're using more each January. You can look for month-over-month trends, see if you're using more maybe every 3 months compared to every 2 months. You can look for increases and decreases. But the main thing with this, like I said, is you're able to then use this information to put together a picture as to what you use in terms of energy. Now, one of the things that's very important with this is that you can use this entire picture or this entire synopsis here, or this summary, whatever you want to refer to it as. You can then use that to determine what's happening with your home. So if your home is particularly drafty, you can then estimate, or you can then essentially use these numbers to determine how much energy you can save. Now, one of the things that you can do as a homeowner as well is you can actually make contacts with Natural Resources Canada, and you can say, hey, I need an auditor to come and look at my home, an energy evaluator. Now, there is a cost attached to this, so I don't want to get too much into detail with this. Remember, we're looking at low-cost measures and we're looking at do-it-yourself measures. Now, why I'm mentioning this is because when your auditor comes, or if you're getting an energy audit or evaluation done on your home, the auditor will essentially be looking at various things to do with your home. They'll be looking at how you use space heating. They'll be looking at your windows, how drafty your windows are, the age of your roof, all of those things they'll be looking at. Now, I am here to tell you that you can actually recreate what the auditors do and what they look for with a number of very simple ways. Now, here is a look at one of the tests that energy evaluators use. Now, this test is called a blower door test. And in a little bit, we'll actually see a video of how this works. Now, what they're looking for when they execute a blower door test, they're looking to see how air flows in and out of your home. So essentially what they do is they put this big mechanism that you can see on the right-hand side. They put that inside of one of your doors, maybe it's your front door, side door, rear door, whatever have you, and they pull all the air out of your home. The main thing that they're looking for is where that air replenishes itself from. Is it coming through your window frames? Is it coming through your door frames? Is it coming through your drains? Is it coming through your light switches, your electrical sockets? Where is that air coming from? How is it getting in? And the main thing that they're doing there when they're doing that is they're trying to figure out how exactly they can seal it up. So we can actually recreate this test with a simple few measures. Now, like I said, there are costs attached to this if you're using an energy evaluator for NRCan. But like I said, my main thing here is low cost measures. I want to go ahead and show you that video to show you how that blower door test works.
Is a picture of the blower doing a blow test. And so you can see how it's set up. And Owen actually basically lined it up with the door, put the sealing over it. So now he's going to turn it on, and it's going to suck all the air out and kind of see where the leakages are.
So we can set up the different openings with the fan.
Yeah.
So let's try with the ring A.
Yeah.
That's what we call.
Yeah.
The starting pressure is the -0.2.
Perfect. Now with the blower door test, one of the things that you'll realize or you'll recognize is that you have that mechanism in the actual door, and then you'll see on the little display there on the little screen, it tells you the pressure. Now that pressure will ramp up slowly, but what it's doing is it's pulling air out, and as it's ramping up, it's pulling more and more air out. So the fan speed increases and it starts to suck more and more air out. What it's looking for when it does that, or what the auditor is looking for when it's doing that, it's looking to see where that air is coming in from. And the main thing behind this, or the main concept behind this, is relatively basic. Of course, the air coming in is going to blow that smoke. It's going to unfurl it, and it's going to kind of give it some undulations and what's not. So the main thing there is if there's any way that you can detect where that air is coming from, would be to use this smoke test. So the main thing here is you get a stick of incense or anything else that creates smoke. You kind of go along your window frames. As you can see here, I have this red line along your window frames here. And what you're looking for when you're doing that is you're looking for if the smoke is just going straight up, or if it looks like it's blowing away. If it looks like it's blowing away, that is an area where you have a leak. Now, one of the things that you also have to look for with that as well is if it's blowing towards the window, because sometimes it may be air coming in, but sometimes there's also air going out as well. It depends on wind directions and where you are in your home and things like that. So those are all things that you have to look for. So the main thing here that you're looking for when you're doing an incense test, you're looking to make sure that that smoke is going directly up. Anywhere else, that is essentially saying to you that you may have a leak. Now, some things here to remember is when you're doing the smoke test, please try to reduce airflow as much as possible. So even if your furnace or air conditioning units or whatever comes on, you'll have to make sure that it's off, because that's of course going to circulate air around the room. You want the room to be as still as possible. So any fans, any blowers, any ducts or anything like that, you want to make sure that those are off first, right? So that's the main thing with that. And when you get that room to be nice and still, then you're looking to see how that air is flowing around that room. So you go all around the window frame and you look for any areas that essentially can be creating that draft or can be adding to that draft. Now, I have a video here that I wanted to show you of that because I can explain it, but I think it'll be a little bit better if you see it for yourself. So let's see if we can have that video now.
Here is another window where we can do that same incense test. I'm going to bring it over. And you can pretty clearly see that that smoke is being deflected, right? It's going off to the side. So that's definitely a leaky window. And I've already marked this one with a little bit of tape so that way we know we're going to go after that spot. And then you can kind of go along to different places and just see where you have issues. Right? There's another spot. This one's maybe not as bad, but you can see it's not going straight up and down. Apparently you can do this with a candle smoke too, but I tried that, it didn't work as well. I think incense is really great for it.
Here is a look at do-it-yourself sealing. And the main thing that we want to think about, or the main thing that we want to look at when we're doing sealing, is we want to seal up all of the different parts of our windows and all of the different parts of our doors, especially when there's cold weather coming. So the main thing that we want to seal is we want to seal our window frames, especially where it sits into the actual frame construction itself. We want to seal the window pane underneath the window where it's sitting in that, and then also the window casing as well, where the actual window sits inside the casing and actually moves up and down or outward and inward, things like that. So there are a number of different areas here that you have to seal or kind of think about sealing. And the main thing here that you want to do is you want to be able to think in like triangles and circles so that you can understand what happens, squares and rectangles, so that you can understand how to do this as well. Now the doors, another thing that we'll talk about in coming slides. I'll just go through the windows first and then we'll get to the doors. But the main thing that you want to do with your doors as well is you want to make sure that that frame is well sealed. You want to make sure that under the door itself is well sealed as well. And you can actually use a weatherization kit for that. And the reason with that or the reasoning behind that is sometimes when the door is sitting in that frame, you actually have a very big gap that you can see all around the door, where you can see light coming in. And then if you put your hand there, you can actually feel air going in or actually air going out. And again, that is robbing you of your energy and creating higher energy bills for you as well, right? So the main things there with your doors, you want to make sure that frame is well sealed. You want to make sure under the frame is well sealed. And we'll take a look at some videos that we can do or we can analyze to kind of make that better. Now here is a look at this image that I took. Here is a look at a window sitting in its casing and a window sitting in the actual wall itself. And one of the things that you'll see here, especially the image on the left, you'll see there is a gap between the window and the actual wall, and that gap is probably about 6, 7, almost millimeters or so. So essentially, a pen can fit inside there. Now, the main thing with that is that you'll most likely have some insulation in there, but if it's not very well insulated, you'll still get some drafts coming through there. And essentially, you can see how big of a space this is to have a draft. So it means that in some cases, depending on how the wind is blowing, that air could be going right out through that space, or air could be coming right in through that space. And what you want to do is you want to be able to minimize that. So the thing to do here would be to go to your hardware store and get the appropriate caulking so that you can seal this up. But you have to determine whether your caulking is going to be exterior caulking or interior caulking, and then use them appropriately. Now, the differences between the two, interior caulking and exterior caulking, is essentially how they respond to weather conditions. So exterior caulking will be a little bit more robust, so that when the sun shines on it and it gets snow on it and it gets wet from the rain, and then the sun comes out again and it's nice and hot and stuff like that, it essentially wouldn't just buckle up and peel and essentially just strip away from the window under those conditions, right? If you're using interior caulking for an exterior application, that can most likely happen, and you'll have to do it over again, right? So the main thing that you want to do is anytime you're caulking the exterior of a window frame, which is also just as important as the interior, you can't forget the outside, but what you want to do there is make sure that you're using the right type of caulking. Now for interior caulking, the main thing here that you want to do is you want to form a seal. So all of these areas here where you're seeing a gap, you want to make sure that that gap is nice and filled with caulking. And there are a number of different ways in which you can apply that caulking, and that's something that we'll get into in the next coming slides as well. Now, the final thing that I want to remind you of here before you apply your caulking is to clean the surfaces. So make sure there's no dust, dirt, grime, little bits of paint, maybe some old caulking. Make sure all of that stuff is gone before you apply new caulking, simply because that will impact the bond or how it adheres to the surface, how it forms an adhesive. And that's the main thing with caulking, is trying to stick on to whatever you put it on. So if you put it on, old paint bits or whatever have you, it's going to kind of clump up and stick to that more than anything else. And you don't want it to stick to that. You want it to stick to the wall here and the window's frame as well, to form a nice bond so that you can have a robust envelope. Now, there are 3 main ways in which you can apply caulking to a window. So you can have a caulking applicator, which you can see in this image here on the left-hand side, and this is the image at the top right. On the left-hand side, that is a caulking applicator. So that can help to remove old caulking, but it can help to apply new caulking as well. And then on top of that, it can kind of conform it in place. You can essentially get one of these probably under $20, probably even less than $10 at your local hardware store. And it's a useful tool to have, especially to help you with your caulking and your re-caulking as well. So very handy tool to have. Now, another thing that you can do, and some people use their thumb for that. So some people don't even buy one and just use their thumb. But another thing that you can do as well is you can get a pouch of caulking, and that pouch of caulking essentially comes ready to apply without using or without needing any other tools, because it has that little spout across the front. Now, the final thing here is with a caulking gun. And this caulking gun is the orange mechanism that you see here in the bottom left of your screen. Now for caulking guns, you have to buy, I don't want to say a special caulking. It's not a special caulking. It's essentially just a pouch of caulking that has kind of like a shaft inside that can be depressed. And if you ask at your local hardware store, they'll definitely be able to give you caulking that's compatible with a caulking gun. Now the thing with this is you kind of like pull the little trigger here and it shoots a piston forward, and as it goes forward it kind of pushes the caulking out to the front, and then you can use that to kind of essentially apply your caulking wherever need be. Right, so the number of different ways in which you can apply your caulking, number of different tools and techniques that you can use there with that.
So in order to seal up these windows, what we're going to do, we don't need to do the weather stripping on these ones, as we kind of already looked at. But what we do notice is that there are some gaps, you can see, between the window casing here and the drywall. So we do want to put a bead of caulking along there. So if I can do this with one hand. And I've got this tube of caulking because this is just easier for me than a caulking gun. I just have more control over this. So I'm going to put a very thin bead of caulk. It's okay if there's a few little gaps in here. Okay, as I come along like that. And I don't do too much at once. Then I put that down. And then I'm just going to kind of run my finger along it. And you can see, in most cases, I need a bit more there. Yeah, a bit thicker. Okay. In most cases, that's sealing up the gap. All right. So you just want to make sure that you don't have too much caulking on there, otherwise it makes a big mess.
Now, the main thing that you're looking for when you're sealing your doors is you want to make sure that that door sits into that frame properly and flushly, and make sure that there are no areas or gaps where air can get in around that door. Now, there are two main ways in which you can apply door sealing kits here. One way is by use of a kit that has an adhesive, or you can go with a little bit more of a permanent kit where you actually have to screw it into the door frame. Now, this works well for drafty doors. So if you are using the smoke test on the door and you see that there's a lot of smoke blowing away from the door, it tells you that a lot of air is coming in around that door frame. So it means that you're going to have to do something about that. And there are a lot of different options here. So on the left-hand side here, what you're seeing is you're actually seeing kind of under the door seal, right? And that's because a lot of air can come under that door seal. And if you look at this area here, you'd actually see, if that wasn't there, you'd see how big of an area there you have that air can get through, right? Now, another part of the door is the actual frame itself. So inside the frame, so where the door comes in and sits in the frame, you want to make sure in there is well sealed as well, because when the door is sitting in that, that will also form an air gap. So when you're looking at your doors, you can see here, you need to think about the hinges and where the door sits on the hinge. You need to think about the lock area and where the door sits in and around the lock. You need to think about the bottom of the door and the top of the door as well. So essentially the extremities of the door. Now, if your door has windows in it as well, or glass panes in it as well, and those glass panes you think are drafty, then means that you can use one of the other methods that we went over for windows to seal those up as well. But the main thing here is that you want to be able to seal up your leaks, and then you also want it to be not only aesthetically pleasing, but you also want it to be functional as well. So you can see now he's looking at the old stopper, so replacing the old stopper with a new stopper, and then he's essentially using a permanent kit to be able to install that door jamb or install that door seal essentially here. Now, one of the main things that you have to think about when you're doing this is any older pieces or any older kits that may be there already, you don't want it to get in the way of the door. So you may have to glue those down, or you may have to caulk those down to make sure that they're not in the way of the door, because over some time, closing and opening the door will drag them out, or it will kind of like break them up and bend them up and things like that. So one of the main things here that you want to make sure, that it's well installed, whether you're using a permanent kit or one that has glue on it, and then that it fits flushly in that door frame to reduce those energy leaks, right? Now, another problematic area, believe it or not, with your home can actually be your plugs and your switches. Now, if you remember, I mentioned before, there's sometimes or some areas, some homes where a lot of air or a lot of wind can actually get into the wall itself. And if it's getting into the wall, well, there's no other way for it to get into the home than through your switches, just for safety's sake, to kind of kill the electricity first and then go from there. Now, the main thing with this is using specialized kits that you get from the hardware store for this, and you'll get this from the hardware store. And the reason for that is because these kits are not only made for insulation, but they're also fire retardant as well. So
first of all, I'm just going to take this outlet cover off. Then I just take my foam pad and I'm just going to kind of tear along the perforation that I want. And then I'm going to kind of just pop out the holes for the 2 screws. And I place it over top. And it's not bad. There's a bit of a gap there. So I probably will caulk this one, because even when that presses against, there's still going to be an air gap there. So then at that point, I'm going to put the plate back on. Yeah, there's definitely some air gaps around this. So I'm not entirely happy with it. And then I'm just going to put a little thin bead of caulking along here. Hopefully I'll do a good job of, because you're watching. Just going to then run my finger along this just to smooth it out. Kind of to go around the corners. And you can get caulking, like acrylic silicone caulking mix, where you can paint it later on. There. Now, that one is done.
Energy saving kits. And what energy saving kits really are, they're essentially temporary measures that can help to reduce the airflow through that window. So especially in winter, when you're going to have the window closed anyway, it will make sense to use one of these simply because it will help to create an air barrier where you're essentially keeping that outside air outside, but you're maintaining the inside air. You want to separate those two because that is particularly important to do. I took some pictures here of some that were installed. So on the right-hand side here, you can see one that's been installed. Here's an energy-saving kit. This is essentially what one of the temporary ones looks like. Now, you also have some of the permanent ones as well. And the permanent ones are a little bit more ergonomic. So like I said, this on the right-hand side is a temporary one. The permanent ones now, they utilize actual strips that you can screw into the window frame or screw onto the wall. And then you have a big panel that you can just click them on with a magnetic strip, right? So it's a little bit more of a permanent installation. It does the same thing, but it's a little bit better in terms of, having to remove it and a little bit easier to work with as well. Now for heritage homes, if you have any stained glass or any really thin windows, this may be something that you want to consider because those thin windows are essentially very drafty. You have a lot of drafts coming in and out of them. So this works well for those older homes that may have a lot of windows. If you have a lot of windows in your home, every 2 feet you have another window or something of that nature, that may be something that you want to consider. And if you have older windows where the glass is particularly thin or it's just one pane of glass, that's something that you want to consider as well. So even if you have radiators in your home, and these are hot water radiators for actual heating, one of the things that you want to make sure with these radiators, you want to make sure that the airflow around them is unobstructed. Now, the reason for that is because warm air rises, cold air falls. Right? So as your radiator is giving off heat from that hot water, the air around it is going to rise, right? And it's going to be drawing cooler air to the bottom of it so that that air can rise constantly. And that's what we call the stack effect. If it's somehow hindered it's not going to be as efficient as it possibly can be. Now, one of the things that you can consider here is if you have a room and that room has like a large sink of just warm air sitting at the top and then cold air at the bottom, and it's kind of not mixing properly. One of the things that you can consider is a ceiling fan, or you can even consider an updraft fan as well. Now, a ceiling fan is a fan installed from the ceiling, and essentially what it'll do is it'll push that air down and cause it to mix. Or an updraft fan is one that's installed like kind of on the floor or off to the side somewhere, and it'll blow some air up and cause that air to mix. Now, regardless of what you do though, you want that air to mix, because you don't want just a huge sink of hot air or warm air sitting at your ceiling, then you have cold air sitting at the bottom, right? So the main thing is to try to get that to mix and making sure that you have things in place so that that can happen. So your radiators, you want to make sure that they're nice and clear. There's nothing obstructing them. There's nothing that's stopping them from heating, and that heat is not causing any other risks or any other problems as well. But here is a cross section of a chimney assembly. And the chimney assembly is very important. You want to make sure it's well sealed and well maintained as well. Now, the reason for this is because, of course, your chimney is going to be producing warm air, and it's going to warm the air around it. But remember, that warm air is then going to rise. So it means now that it's going to pull cold air from the bottom, and it's going to pull cold air from somewhere. So if your envelope is somehow breached or something of that nature, it's going to pull cold air through that. So you want to make sure that your entire chimney assembly here is well sealed. You want to make sure that you're not creating any stack effects, or you're not creating any areas where it's just going to be sucking air right out of your home. Now, filtration, in terms of your furnace and your ventilation system, filtration is very important. So one of the things that you want to do is you want to make sure that your air filters and your air filtration is up to par as well. You want to make sure that your air filters are clean. A little bit of a caution here, and this might have come from when the air quality was not as high as it possibly could be, but you don't want to go too fine with your filter spec, because too fine means that your furnace has to work harder to force that air through, and then on top of that, it's going to collect more and more particles. So that filter is going to get dusty much more quickly. And as that dust builds, it's going to be harder and harder to force the air through it, right? And then on top of that, you're going to have to replace it pretty often as well, right? So you don't want your filter spec to be too fine, but you still want it to be to a point where you're creating healthy indoor air quality. So this kind of comes with a little bit of a balance. Now, another thing to make sure with your entire furnace system, and this goes all the way, the entire length of the system, so all the way to your duct grills and things like that. The duct grills are those little things that are installed in the floor or installed in the roof or whatever have you, the things that actually blow the air outward, right? Now, those are important. You want to keep those clean, and you want to keep those clear, and you want to keep them free of dust as well, because as that dust builds, it is going to impact the way that air flows, right? And then that can also impact how that air mixes. So the main thing with this is to ensure that the system is well maintained. One of the things that you can do is get a cloth and some warm water, make sure that that dust or any dust is removed, and make sure that this system is well maintained and kept clear. Is you can ensure that your ceiling is working, right? So it would be useful, or it would be beneficial, to take a look at your energy bills before you do any sealing. Do some of the sealing that you are most interested in. So maybe it's your windows and your doors. And then after you do that, it would be useful to kind of compare before to after to see how much they've actually changed, or to see if you can actually see your changes. You should be able to see your changes even if there are minute changes. Now, even if you want to kind of iterate that and do maybe something else, maybe you want to do your plugs and your switches after that, you can then iterate the whole process again. You can do all of this all over again. right? So you can kind of keep track of this, sorry, as you go ahead, and then you should be able to see those reductions every time you seal a different system. So you can repeat seal if need be, where need be, and every time you do it, you should be essentially getting better and better and better until you would have reached the max. So those utility bills hold a lot of information, and you can use that information to your benefit and use that for comparison purposes as well, right? So those utility bills are particularly important.